Welcome all. We are on the show again, coming to you live. No, we can't. We're recording, but we might as well be live because we're really
live for us. It's live for us.
Right, it's good enough. And you've done the "we'll do it live" quote plenty of times. I have with me, returning from the Almost President's podcast, it is the teacher himself, Kevin.
Oh, I'm actually not a teacher anymore, I should say.
Oh, well.
I'm a former teacher.
You taught me a bunch of things.
I got out of there, thankfully for me. Ryan is still a teacher, but I'm not a teacher anymore.
Oh, good. So on display, we're going to talk about Oliver Stone's more recent Showtime featured documentary, JFK Revisited, followed by the initial late 2000s doc, Robert F. Kennedy Must Die. For those who want to watch along with us or want to watch this before, you can find RFK Must Die and an unlisted YouTube link. You might check your local Reddit. You should find it there. JFK Revisited can be purchased or rented off of places like Vudu. Amazon, I don't think, has it anymore, but you can give a free Showtime subscription and then go from there. This was a fun topic to discuss because, you know, we've been back and forth. It's like, what historical dramas and miniseries could we cover that and judge the merit of them, let alone just what they have to offer thematically. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on these. You know, we'll kind of just circle around between both. I guess we could just start with the JFK one and then go to his, we'll go in historical chronological order and then we go to Brother Bobby.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. First thing I wanted to say, the one thing that I love about these conspiracy theory kind of guys is they want so bad to get the word out there that you can always find those docs for free. Like RFK Must Die. It's up there on YouTube, you know.
But I couldn't find it right away, man. I couldn't find it. So I don't think the Kennedy estate wants us to even be talking about this. And
maybe that's what it is. Yeah, the Kennedys are trying to hide it.
I mean, and I know they own like a less than a quarter of the Disney company. So, I mean...
Really? I didn't know that, actually.
I think I saw that somewhere in like some article, and it was just like, but I get it. It's a lot of stuff to digest and discuss, and you know, I get it. If you don't want scandals about your family being listed, you probably use all the power in your might to make it not widely accessible.
Yeah, for sure. And I will sympathize with. I remember when Nancy Pelosi's husband got assaulted or whatever in their home. And a bunch of people came out with all these like conspiracy theories about how he was actually friends with the person who assaulted him or something, or they were gay lovers or something like that. And I think that's one thing that's underplayed in some of these things is it can be kind of deeply offensive for someone who has lost a loved one to be told that actually it's not the reasons that you think it is for why that person was killed. And I think that's something that gets kind of underplayed is I think in some of these, especially, and we'll get into this one. I know we said we would start with the JFK one, but with the RFK documentary, there was that interview with the woman who saw the polka dot dress woman. And it was this very hostile interview. And I was like, you know, not to necessarily say that something fishy wasn't going on there, could have been, but it could be the case that that guy was so hostile just because there was this national tragedy that had literally just occurred before his eyes, and somebody now was coming out and saying, no, it's not, it wasn't the national tragedy you think it was, you know, yeah. So that's kind of one thing I think that sometimes gets lost in some of these conversations.
Yeah. And I get it. It's not a pretty side. And just as a general disclaimer, you know, we're mainly just trying to just figure out why, just kind of the nuts and bolts of what happened these unfortunate days. And you've done a good job on your show on Almost President. So kind of summing up how, you know, much like even Ted Kennedy, like Bobby was a very impactful voice. And it's just, there's a lot of so much collusion that, you know, it'll probably take decades more just to get any kind of impactful, complete story.
Yeah, for sure. And it can definitely be very hard to unpack a story and actually uncover the specific map of events, right? Because that depends on so many witnesses.
What kind of a peace do we seek? Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
The flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died some 38 minutes ago.
Here is the suspect, 24-year-old Lee H. Oswald.
I'm just a patsy. President.
Who actually fired the shots that killed Kennedy? Was there a conspiracy?
In the years since the Warren Report, there is now so much more that we know. Conspiracy theories are now conspiracy facts.
The Warren Commission successfully deceived the public.
Allen Dulles' appointment to the Warren Commission is one of the great frauds of American history.
Documents are withheld by the FBI, the CIA.
Intelligence agencies did all the wrong things if they were looking for conspiracy.
We will go back and piece together new facts and evidence that shed more light on what really happened here that day.
The Commission believes that the same bullet that hit Kennedy hit Conley. Well, I don't believe it.
It is indeed a magic bullet.
Oswald was a figure of interest for 4 years before the assassination. They were reading his mother's mail.
His first year in office, Kennedy made many enemies.
He vows he's going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces.
Have you ever committed any act of violence?
He was intimately involved in the cover-up.
Once you kill a president on the streets of American City, that sends a signal.
The rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.
If America really wants a democratic society, and we should get to the bottom of this traumatic crime that continues to reverberate throughout American history.
This nation will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
I will say we came on previously a few months ago to talk about the movie that this is, I guess, supposed to be a follow-up to, which is 1992's JFK, the Oliver Stone movie. It's not a documentary. It's like a drama film, political drama kind of film.
Right.
And I will say that was a much more entertaining one for me. This was a little dry. At least I found it to be a little dry.
Despite the presence of Donald Sutherland and Whoopi Goldberg chiming in on a few, it was not very organized.
Yeah, star-studded cast in the voice acting department. You know, Whoopi Goldberg and Donald Sutherland, like you said, but it was a little bit dry. And it really, I think, I don't know if you disagree with this, but I think it very much rehashed a lot of the same stuff in just a standard documentary format. So I guess depending on what you're going for, like if you want to watch an exciting movie, the original JFK is a better movie to watch. But if you want just the information, if you just want to hear what happened, or I guess Oliver Stone's perspective of what happened, because at least me personally, I have a lot of disagreements with his narrative. This documentary is definitely a much better way to go, I would say.
It is kind of a wild nuts and bolts kind of thing. I was kind of that way with Black Hawk Down. It's like, if you want to actually know the people, watch the History Channel documentary. If you want to just see the action in real time, you can watch the movie, but you still are very confused as to who's shooting at who. The same kind of deal here. I thought there was some fascinating footage in archive interviews, but it needed more spice for some afterthoughts. And unfortunately, like you say, even though the movie is too many cooks in the kitchen and opinions, and even though it has good performances, it's kind of just somehow it's basically, if you just watch this, if you just want a dry run through, and watch the movie if you just want the various like statements that were problematic for years with the actors recreating the scenarios.
Yeah. Or if you watch the movie and you were confused, which, to be fair, I was the first time. There was a lot of times where I was like, I just can't follow the specifics of all these different things he's trying to lay out. So it just kind of lays it out really plain.
Right.
Yeah.
I get the point of having Donald was because he played Mr. X in the movie, but
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess getting into a little bit of the meat of the documentary, I think that I might be echoing some of the things I said when we came on last. I do take issue with a lot of the things that Oliver Stone says, I don't know. There are a lot of things, I think, especially with the JFK one, that are weird. Particularly the one thing that I find to be a little bit weird is the whole magic bullet thing. You know, the idea that one bullet did it. It just seems a little bit weird to me. I don't rule out that it's possible, but it seems a little bit weird to me. And yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I was kind of the same way where I'm like, okay, I think you're doing a little more harm than good, even though you mean well.
Yeah, and so
starting it off with the conspiracy, you could start off with the facts, and then maybe you could have gone into the disinformation or myths that bastardized it for a while.
Yeah, and so I kind of, one thing when I kind of did a little bit of my own research after having watched it, I don't know if you've seen, there's this famous image of the path that the bullet took that guys like Oliver Stone will show, where it seems to be like kind of like curving, just to show they show this just to show how ridiculous the thing is. So that image is actually not a good image of what happened. And there's another image where essentially it shows, I think it's Connolly up front, and he's kind of like leaning to the side. And that actually explains the path without all the like loops and curves. But the thing that is weird on top of that, the thing that, because the path is not weird actually if you look at it from the right angle, but the thing that is weird is that the bullet came out kind of unscathed. You know, when you shoot a bullet, it bounces around, especially if you shoot it at a human. It bounces off of things, and the bullet gets all warped and deformed. And the magic bullet doesn't look that way. The bullet, they have it in evidence, and it doesn't look that way.
That's kind of how I am.
That's the one weird thing.
That's how I am with technical advisory, where I'm like, hey, you know, I know this is a big issue and everything, but if you're there to advise and even correct story narrative, you know, I would risk probably being fired just to say, hey guys, this didn't happen at all.
Yeah, and that kind of bothered me with the Oliver Stone, like the original film, is they should have showed the actual path of the bullet, not this one that at this point in time has been shown to not be true. Yeah, so that's one thing. One thing I very much take issue with that Oliver Stone says is Oliver Stone has this narrative where JFK was right on the brink of pulling us out of Vietnam.
Yeah.
And this is his theory for why the CIA was motivated to assassinate him. And I think the problem is it doesn't really seem to be the case that JFK was going to do that, at least from my perspective. And most historians are kind of they're kind of mixed. Like some of them will say, okay, maybe he was like maybe he would have, you know, we never know. But he certainly was not like gung-ho, I'm going to bring all the troops home. Like most historians agree on that. That's a pretty consensus thing. Oliver Stone cites this document. What was it called? Do you remember the national?
It was
like, NASM something?
Yeah, it was like a national statement of some sort. I should have taken better notes on that. But I know the portion you're talking about.
And had it up. But it's okay.
Like I say, I mean, the footage is great, but like you say, I take Oliver Stone as serious as I take Spike Lee, where he's there to get your attention and provide bigger food for thought, but he's mainly just kind of being edgy and breaking rules. You know, like for instance, like Black Klansman, you know, half that shit didn't happen in the movie, but that was fine. That was part of the narrative to paint a bigger picture. Right. It did that deliberately, as opposed to, hey, no, we're going to tell you the story and then make shit up that bastardizes the story. No, that's not typical Hollywood. That's them being artistic and just painting a bigger portrait on issues of the time. Oliver's, though, I think for a while, he just risked becoming a giant unorganized rant, and you're just kind of like, well, clearly you're very well intended. I'm kind of lost in the shuffle here.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Spike Lee, right? With Spike Lee, he is making films that are meant to be good films and entertaining films. And so if you twist the narrative, it's kind of forgivable, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to produce a good film, if you have to bend the narrative a little bit to make it more interesting, that's kind of acceptable. but Oliver Stone is purporting to be telling us facts.
Know better.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So
I'll applaud him for having the Stones to want to talk to Vladimir Putin and Castro and all these guys over the years, because I don't think any of us could. Because he pretty much states that I've only seen portions of those, and he's just like, I want to know, and it's like, well, okay, knock yourself out, but I wouldn't confuse it with entertainment.
There's a lot of things like Putin. No. I'm a little uncomfortable with interviewing Putin. I mean, I agree. I mean, to some extent, I think like if you can interview someone, interview them. I haven't seen that specific one, but to some extent, I think if you can do it, might as well, for the purpose of like gaining information. If you're like a documentarian, like he is, I will say, I'll applaud him. I think America, while I do think that Castro was insane in a variety of ways, I think America had too hostile of a position towards him, and I don't think it was to anyone's benefit. And so, whatever on that one, I guess. But oh shoot, I just found the name of that. It's called National Security Action Memorandum 263.
Oh, wow.
Just found it. Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, so not NSA or anything. It's like, no, just
yeah. And so this memorandum was essentially something that Kennedy had signed off on, basically saying he was going to draw back about 1,000 military personnel from Vietnam. And it has some indication that they think like, okay, things are kind of going fine here. We won't need to remain here for much longer, and we'll end this whole conflict by 1965. And days after Kennedy was killed, LBJ basically went back on that. He passed a second memorandum basically saying, no, we're not going to end the I don't want to say occupation, but the military presence in Vietnam. And he so he kind of went back on that. But Kennedy was, I think, also kind of questioning whether that was going to be a good move. And also the withdrawal of 1,000 troops didn't necessarily mean that they were going to follow through on the other promise that the conflict would end, So
yep. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, especially with, like you say, these new findings that, hey, this wasn't followed, or this was the public story and, report, but it wasn't followed up on. So don't confuse the statement with actual, on the record, carrying out material.
So, I think those are some of my major thoughts. Would the CIA take out a president? Maybe. Like, that would be an extreme action, but
we know about the Cuba stuff and all that, but yeah, it is. I think that's actually a good segue to the second one. And it's like, it does make you wonder, like, we've seen how crazy either side can be, let alone how, if people are willing to just refuse to acknowledge each other, there's no limit to just how violent anything can be. I mean, we've seen reports on how activists were targeted by the FBI during J. Edgar Hoover's time. So, if people want to paint a bigger portrait, I'm cool with that. But maybe try and do some more looking around and finding some new stuff. Interview some history professors, interview some other stuff, instead of just, well, I'm regurgitating this and half of it's on InfoWars. It's like, okay, I don't want to listen to this.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Interviewing probably the same people who were sources for the last movie would be my guess. So, there are some weird things with the JFK assassination, no doubt. I question whether the motive was there with the CIA, given the fact that I don't think JFK was trying to draw back troops in Vietnam, or if he was, I don't know that he was necessarily fully trying to end the conflict.
And LBJ is already a big cluster in terms of what he did and didn't do.
Yeah, and also I think one thing worth noting there is that it turned out to be the case that LBJ took the Vietnam War to insane extremes, right? However, you wouldn't necessarily have known that at the time. He was not exactly a gung-ho foreign policy, I want to go into all these wars guy. And I think one thing that's worth noting is most presidents, with a few exceptions, they really don't want to spend much time doing anything foreign policy related. And to the extent that they get tied into foreign policy entanglements, they always wind up considering it like a huge mistake. And LBJ is no different. LBJ, to his grave, I think, regretted that this wound up being the thing that he got remembered for, this huge entanglement. He wanted to be remembered for like the Great Society and stuff like that,
I kind of got
so
that.
I don't know that you could. Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know that you could predict that LBJ would be very like cozy to the idea of the Vietnam War. It would be anybody's guess.
American Scandal podcast did a good episode on the whole Cuban Missile Crisis to other nuclear fallout to just other Cold War threats. And basically, you pretty much get the gist of Kennedy not wanting to act on stuff, wanting to be the bigger man in the room and the final voice, while Bobby was often the louder than, I'm going to give you hell, So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a part of Bobby's legacy, right? As him being, when he was younger, kind of this hard-headed attorney general who was, kind of
Bobby was even more foolish and almost did a lot of jail time, for beating up a cop at a wedding, like, man.
True. Yeah.
It's just, it's also just, you want to talk about circumstances. It's like half of these people, they even kind of had, it's not that they had no business being in politics, but it's just like, you couldn't have told them that that's where they would be, X amount of years from now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, a lot of these guys definitely they were like that, and JFK was a little bit of a dark horse candidate. He was not necessarily expected to do as well as he did. I don't want to say he was a total dark horse.
It's not like George Washington where he didn't want to, but he then finally said, "Oh, okay, fine. I guess someone's got to."
He wanted to. Yeah, he definitely wanted to. It's just he was kind of
that way.
Yeah, he had come into politics largely because his dad had so much money, and less because he was already kind of part of the Washington establishment. And so for that reason, a lot of people didn't think he was going to be able to beat out someone like Nixon, who was, the VP.
Yeah.
So
it's even funnier just seeing how Nixon is a perfect example of someone who's remembered for a lot of shit, who did like maybe 5 good things, like opening up like better water preservation and everything. And it just reminds you, it's like, hey, well, that's kind of, label it how you want. Hey, it's either them covering their ass or they're being productive or they were doing their job, but they were also, breaking every other law. I can only hope that with future generations, people keep reminding that each other that almost all of this is possible. Especially with look at your phone here and now, and how half that data has already been stolen. You're going to see an ad pop up with stuff that no one else should know. But, so I think when you look at even just criminals half the time, it makes you wonder what is legal anymore when you're hearing about all these wiretapping stories and legal obtaining of information. I mean, there's another person who won't be named. He was related to January 6th, and they pretty much just got a slap on the wrist instead of any jail time.
Right. Yeah, it's true. I know it's true. I think definitely, especially with the emerging technology and, AI, all this stuff, I do think we probably need more clarity from the law on what is and is not allowed in terms of cybersecurity and in terms of
what is terrorism.
Yeah. And in terms of like, I don't think there's really I don't really think there's much of any laws as to like what these companies can do with your data. They can, I think, do basically what they want, because the perception is you're selling you're offering them your data in return for you using their services. And I think there probably should be some clarity on like, what is Facebook allowed to do with my data? Are there any rules at all? Like, I think there should be probably some, right? So,
yeah. And open everyone up to is like, the world is not black and white, like you see on TV. It is not cops and robbers anymore. There's so many layers to it. Some you could maybe even argue that, well, maybe not argue, but you could just state that they're ripe for a hot topic, and I'm not saying that because we want a debate or anything trivial, but it's just like, I mean, you think gun control and abortion rights are already a big hot topic. I mean, information and double standards, I think, need to be talked about a little extra, especially with how. I mean, you'll see it every election. You'll see someone is like, I'm okay with this, but not this and that. I'm like, well, they've done this and that, so why do you think that? Validate each other, but also figure out is like, well, other than just whatever party you've always been loyal to, why do you want to vote for this guy? Other than where you heard this rumor or statement. I think it's going to get messier. So I can only hope that even if cable wants to make really great use of its time, I think they should form some extra news stations, instead of just, regardless of how you want to slant. I mean, I think Spectrum does an okay deal, but I'd like to see even more just local affiliates just say, hey, we're going to do our twist on this and open up the chat instead of you just angrily watching Fox News or CNN at your, relative's house and just like, I don't even want to look at the screen.
I guess bring it back to JFK.
Yeah.
One thing I meant to say this earlier. I just wanted to loop this in. I found a quote from Theodore Sorensen, who was one of JFK's speechwriters.
Oh, neat.
And he said many, many years later, in 2008, he said, I would like to believe that Kennedy would have found a way to withdraw all American instructors and advisors from Vietnam. But I do not believe he knew in his last weeks what he was going to do, unquote. So I think that gives you a sense of where I think Oliver Stone is overplaying his hand in this film, where he's indicating that it was very clear that JFK was on the way to withdrawing troops. But, his closest advisors were essentially saying, yeah, Kennedy didn't really know what he was going to do next, and one thing I'll throw into the mix as well is that the situation in South Vietnam at that time was changing very rapidly.
Yes.
Right before,
oh my God.
Right. Yeah.
Saigon and the French.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. And right before Kennedy died, I mean, you can call him president. He was more of a dictator, but the president of South Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem, was assassinated. Like, I think
Big
less
time.
than a month before Kennedy died. Yeah, and so the
bad.
situation was changing rapidly. It was very unstable. So, I don't think anyone can really say that Kennedy was going to withdraw from Vietnam. That seems very unclear to me. But yeah.
For an extra sidebar, people who like history and war and westerns and just other documentaries, you might check out We Were Soldiers. Does an interesting take on what the Viet Cong were doing and their strategy plan versus the U.S. recruiting young guys in there at the start. There's some historical merit to it. There's also historical inaccuracies where a lot of the guys portrayed by Mel Gibson and Sam Elliott weren't actually on the field at that particular battle, but you got to just let it go if you just want a documentation of it. But at the very start, it does portray the French. Now, do I believe that the Viet Cong rubbed it in their face, Rambo style? No, but I think they definitely took no prisoners and massacred these guys. But it's interesting how all the stuff we're looking at, it covers a segment of it. But I get it. As a filmmaker, you just can't help it. You want to, much like Stone, just add your 2 cents. And I'm like, it's like, I'm not even sure if I could watch Argo nowadays, for instance, because that whole second half, which is very exciting, did not happen.
I don't think I've seen that movie, but yeah, I know, especially with a lot of the war on terror stuff. I think it's about that, right, Argo?
Oh yeah, it's about the hostage crisis, but it's just
okay. Oh, it's the hostage crisis. Okay.
Yeah, and some of the Canadian guys and other CIA guys who helped bust it. But yeah, I think Lone Survivor does a pretty good job. When I go to even History versus Hollywood once in a while, where it just shows a lot of the people making cameos, how they look, and you don't have to wait for the movie to show the real life people at the end when they're done with the reenactment. But I like how they sometimes just show stuff in the loop, like Lone Survivor, like Marcus Luttrell, for instance. He makes a cameo in there, and it's his life story, but he just flat out just said is like, your guess is as good as mine as to the exact certain aspects of this, mission gone wrong, because, we're recounting it, and obviously there's going to be some inaccuracies on the time and everything, and other technology that was down that couldn't have, possibly covered it in that time span. So we had to compress it, even though it was definitely months of survival.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So did we want to?
We're pretty much on the same page. I think we were both way more fascinated by the RFK thing.
Before I started making this film, I knew nothing about Bobby Kennedy. A privileged guy with 10 kids who became a hero to Black and Hispanic communities and promised to heal a divided America. Then a year before I was born, he was assassinated. This is the story of Kennedy and his assassin. The official story, the evidence against, and the others who may have been involved.
He hated all communists, He what you call 100% American all the way through. You don't mess with him and he'll blow your ass apart.
This girl came running down the stairs in the back, and said, "We've shot him, we've shot him." And I says, "Who did you shoot?" And she says, "We shot Senator Kennedy." She had on a white dress with polka dots. She was light-skinned, dark hair, and she has a funny nose. I thought it was really funny. All my friends tell me I'm so observant.
One of the problems was that Sirhan couldn't remember the actual shooting of Robert Kennedy. So he put him under hypnosis and had him recreate the night of the assassination. To me, it was obvious that he had been programmed to kill Robert Kennedy and programmed to forget that he'd been programmed.
There are just things that boggle the mind that should be looked into. If all of this leads to where we suspect it's going to lead, we don't want it to ever happen again.
I was really surprised at the amount of people who have worked on it. It was one of those where it was distributed by this Canadian company. Subtitle is The Assassination of Bobby Kennedy. It's such a shame how, you go to IMDb, which is owned by Amazon, they're like, bring it on Amazon, and they're like, oh, we no longer have the rights to share this. Like, damn it. So other than the YouTube link, I'm not sure where else any of us would have been able to see it, unless we want to pay for an expensive DVD.
Yeah, and who even has a DVD player anymore?
I do, but okay. It's a good point.
I don't.
Yeah. Most people are not going to have it, I couldn't find much on like where it played or anything. It looks like it might have played at a few festivals. And
what I thought was kind of cool about it was it felt very, very much like an independent work of journalism. It felt like this one guy doing a very like thorough investigation of the situation and of what happened. And I really thought that was kind of cool. When I was in college, I used to watch like homemade YouTube documentaries, and it felt almost like one of those. Yeah, it felt almost like one of those, but like better, like more well done.
Oh yeah, so. I had fun doing it in film school, just seeing how many people were motivated to go the distance, and how many others were it's like, you almost hit the nail on the head, but you got such tacky narration, or too much B-roll and not enough of you interviewing the people. The hardest part was definitely reminding yourself, hey, as interesting as all of us find this, it can't be 3 hours long. This documentary has got to, you got to dial this down. I always love it when you see editorials or just giant stories and it's multiple people interviewed, but they dissect, all these separate interviews into one whole collective. It's like, this guy is, these 5 people are talking about this one guy. And it's like, see, that is just as impactful as watching an actual well-made, crisp, clear documentary.
Yeah, right. I agree. So I guess getting into the meat of the documentary then. What did you think about the overall narrative? I thought some of it was a little wacky, personally.
I think they did play into some of the conspiracy theories at the time. I'm not sure how much of that was their narrative versus that's how they got distribution. I know this is aired on the documentary channel, but I wouldn't be surprised if this showed up on some other conspiracy network. I think it's a decent intro to those trying to find the general facts and a good reconstruction of the LA crime scene with the survivors talking. And so it gets extra points on the interviewees. I mean, I'm kind of with you. There is some other stuff in there when, much like this, they do kind of talk about the CIA might have been behind it. I'm like, okay, well, how much of this is you versus you got someone there? Because I mean, the JFK, if there's one good thing about that documentary, other than like some of the Chris remastered footage, was they had the line conspiracy theory is now conspiracy fact, which again, take it with a grain of salt. But this one, I feel like they could have used a little more like awesome title cards and intros to each chapter.
Yeah, I kind of, I can kind of agree with that. It was, I mean, again, it felt like it was a little bit more simply made, but
the material made up for it, but at the same time, you would have liked to see a little more oomph, a little more bang for your buck.
Yeah, and I think one thing that maybe this is a rude thing to say, I don't know, but I think that if your explanation for why this guy isn't responsible for killing Bobby Kennedy is that he was secretly hypnotized by the CIA, I feel like you've just got no case. Like, I feel like that's that's it.
It was a cop out in that. I liked.
Yeah, that was just a little silly to me.
I liked like 5 other things that they discussed, but yeah, the hypnotizing definitely didn't make sense to me. And I've seen people practice it and everything. I can understand if you're at a dinner party and you do just like simple things, kind of like a magician trick. But yeah, if it was just, I do feel like they kind of glamorized unintentionally. I don't feel like they were trying to, but I feel like they gave him too much of a talking voice. And it's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, and I think that, the idea that, first of all, I think what you're saying is true. Hypnosis, I think, is kind of a real thing, but it doesn't work like that. You can't just like mind control people.
Yeah, like my mom does psychic work with animals, but it is not at all like you see on TV where Jinkies, I solved the case. It's like, no, you get a vision, but you don't, you can't see, you don't just see dead spirits and everything, and all that shit.
Sure, yeah.
Unfortunately, people like to cling on to the fiction versus the reality. So I wouldn't be surprised if if maybe 40 years from now, someone says, by the way, this documentary is absolute horse shit. They didn't get any of it right. I'm like, well, okay, well, so there you go. I do feel like the documentary, at least I like that they went out and talked to a bunch of more under the radar people, former government and CIA guys. But at the same time, you could also make the argument, maybe some of them are liars, so.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I don't know if I think anybody is a liar in these situations. I think that people underestimate how hard it is to remember these really chaotic and high emotion events. If you see a senator who you supported and you really believe in, because a lot of people, unlike many other presidential candidates, like RFK people were true believers. They really, really thought he was going to change the world. And to see him get gunned down right in front of you, your memory is not going to piece that together in a perfect way. It's just not, because first of all, it's chaotic as hell. And second of all, you have so much emotion in that moment that it's going to warp what actually happened. And from what I was reading, there was this idea in the movie that people were saying he couldn't have shot him from the distance that he was supposed to have shot him. Like, witnesses saw him shooting him from farther away. And the problem is that's just people's memory. And how do we know that they put it together accurately? And apparently there are other witnesses who I don't think were in the film, but there were other witnesses who said they saw him basically firing twice. So he fires once from far away, and then he runs up to Kennedy and shoots again a second time. And that's where that second wound comes from. That seems like it had to have been shot from up close, if that makes sense.
I unfortunately, like you're saying, you don't know how much of it is trapped in by trauma versus, because sorry guys, we didn't have phones back then. Otherwise.
Yeah, right. Like we don't have a perfect I guess imagining of the event through like a phone. Yeah, so it's
I'd
a
be
little
even
bit harder
more
to...
frightened if something like this happened during post-internet age, though.
Yeah,
with
for
AI,
sure. Yeah.
I think half the people would be brainwashed and be like, "Hey, he didn't really get shot. He's still alive and kicking." I'm like,
right?
What?
Yeah.
No. Why would you say that?
yeah. That's
it's tough
true.
to say. But I was impressed with like some of the other people they got. But like you're saying, I mean, I think they are. We all have a bias, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are, just love the sound of their own voice. But
yeah, and I mean, I think that some of them genuinely believe that they saw something, and who knows? I wasn't there. Maybe they did. But I think most of these people, I don't think anybody's lying. That wouldn't be my position. But I don't know that if all we've got is that people saw the gun getting fired from this distance and not from this distance. I don't know if that's going to sell me personally.
I think one of the other general guys, he kind of came off to me as a good old boy. It's like, oh, I'm a proud American, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had stuff he flat out can't declassify. He can't tell us.
Yeah. So I'm
say.
Yeah, that's true. That's also possible.
But like you say, I'm with you. I don't think they want to lie or misinform, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're misremembering or wrote down their notes wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think we've been kind of talking about this for a minute, but I'm thinking maybe we should kind of clarify what happened. So the I guess outline of events that with Bobby Kennedy getting shot is he walks off stage after having given the speech on June 5th after he wins the California primary.
Mm-hmm.
And
in LA, the city.
Yep. And he's cutting through basically the kitchen. And then Sirhan's in there and he shoots him multiple times. And that's it. He's dead. And where the conspiracies come in is I guess based on forensics or whatever, if I remember correctly, and you can correct me, Cam, if I'm mixing something up. But
it's fine.
But I think that there was something with the forensics where it didn't seem like he could have shot him from a far distance away. He had to have been point blank, like based on the forensics. Yeah, and so some witnesses were saying, we didn't see him up close. We saw him fire from like a few feet away, from like 15 feet away or something. And so there's a conflict there, right? Because it seems like he must have shot him from up close, but some witnesses are saying he didn't do that. So that's kind of what we were talking about.
Much like JFK, the bullet logic still seems to have a lot of holes. No pun intended.
Yeah, and it's I think it's kind of hard with bullets, like, because it's such a wild and chaotic event. I don't know that the fact that the bullet stuff winds up being weird is predictive of much to me,
Yeah, this definitely had way more credibility. Mm-hmm. That's saying a lot for an independent one. You don't always get that.
And that's where I'll give them credit. Like they did, I think they put together a good.
It didn't drag.
The events.
I wasn't looking at my watch too much. I wasn't going, okay, this is fine, but the sound editing or music plays too much over the people talking. It had a lot of exclusive as well as free to use footage, and it was like, hey, it was pretty well intended. It's tough to say that about other documentaries too. So
so the other big thing with the RFK documentary is this woman in the polka dot dress, which I feel like we should address.
Yes.
So
lots of
go ahead.
It's just very kind of like was it Jack Ruby, who was one of the two gunmen for JFK? No,
Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby shot Oswald, I think.
Yeah, there was Oswald, and then so many other suspects, and she's another one where it's like, man, talk about a tough to figure out story. It's like, who is the real culprit?
So the woman in the polka dot dress, just for people listening, it is basically there was this woman in a polka dot dress, as we said, who was seen in various locations throughout the hotel before and after he was shot. And specifically, this one woman whose name is Sandra Serrano, who is a witness, was sitting outside of the hotel. And basically, this woman in the polka dot dress runs out and says, we shot him, we killed Kennedy. And she's just saying this. And the woman's like, kind of like, okay, what's going on there? This woman comes out saying, we shot Kennedy. And there are other sightings of this woman with the polka dot dress, right? So it's not just her, but she is a key witness for this particular claim that there's this woman in the polka dot dress who might have been some sort of co-conspirator. And she allegedly says that this woman came out and says, we shot him, we shot Senator Kennedy. Did you I know you were saying a few things there. Did you have any thoughts about that, the woman in the polka dot dress?
I'm kind of with you. I'm kind of on the same train where I'm like, I'm just still unclear on her intent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like Oliver, that the filmmakers meant to get all theatrical. I don't think they're doing kabuki theater, but it's also tough to say whether she was like a spotter or partner in crime on this whole deal. It's just still very mysterious, and it just makes you wonder. It's like, how would you, as a witness who had seen stuff like this, been able to alert the authorities in time?
Yeah. So I read a couple articles about this one. Well, I read like one big article about the whole RFK thing, and they gave a potential explanation that, there are apparently other witnesses who were also there when the polka dot dress woman said, we shot him. And they say that she never said, we shot him. But let's assume her story is true, that she actually did hear the woman say, we shot him, we shot Kennedy. This passage from this article, I think, is really, I think sums up one of my potential explanations for this. And it says, but even if Serrano heard correctly, another explanation is possible without resorting to speculations about conspiracies. Serrano may also have been witness to an innocent cry of we, i.e. the American people, shot Kennedy, a natural response reflecting the intense concern Americans had at the time to the growing senseless violence that had become a societal phenomenon during the 1960s. So the idea being that what this polka dot dress woman might be screaming as she runs out is we shot him, as in we, the American people, shot him. What are your thoughts on that?
I could go probably so many ways with that.
Yeah, it's to me, it seems like it's a possibility. Like that's something I could see happening. And especially when you're in the moment, in the heat of the moment, when you just watched the senator get shot, you're not going to react in super predictable ways, right? You're going to just kind of react how you react. And so that might be something you say as you run out. You're like, oh my God, we killed him. When you're not actually saying, I conspired to murder the senator. What you're actually saying is we, the American people, because of our violent culture, have killed him. It's almost like a philosophical statement. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but I think it's an interesting thought.
It's tough to say too, just post, 70s, so forth, where we're having people, we see it today still, where people are taking statements out of context, and it's like, okay, the clickbait headline might read that way, but that's not what they actually said, or regardless of their eventual addressing that and excuse. I'm very unclear on it.
And I think that's my thought, is that I think we just don't know. I don't think we have a ton of information here.
Yeah,
it's not like we have a sworn
someone closer to him, maybe.
Yeah, it's not like we have like a sworn affidavit from a woman saying, I killed Senator Kennedy.
We have same thing with Oswald. We're still unclear.
Yeah, we have a statement
other people knew him.
We have a statement that somebody heard outside the hotel really briefly that they may have totally misremembered. And
we don't know this, if this person knew them personally, or we're just a peer.
So that was, and one thing I wanted to add on this one too is I think that when something very significant happens, like the assassination of a presidential candidate like that, there can be this tendency to look back at the event and identify weird things that happened and say, that's weird. Why did it happen on the specific day that that horrible event happened? Yeah. So I don't know if you know about this one, but there was this, I think she's called the Babushka woman. And it was on the day that JFK was assassinated. There was this woman wearing a like headscarf, I think it called a babushka, which is why she gets that name, and just kind of like walking around in weird ways. And it's all on film and you can watch it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and a lot of people have pointed to this and they're kind of like, oh, what's going on here? Blah, blah, blah. But the thing I think people neglect is that weird shit happens all the time and we just ignore it because it's just life. And then just when it happens to be that something crazy happens, it can be easy to look back at that weird stuff that is a daily occurrence and then just grab it and be like, okay, something weird is happening here, when maybe it's not. And maybe it's just another day of weird stuff happening, you know? And so that's one of my thoughts with like the polka dot dress woman is maybe just this was a weird thing that somebody said when they ran out while they were kind of probably adrenaline pumping through their veins. Mm-hmm. And we don't actually know why. And it's not necessarily because they were a co-conspirator in the murder.
Yeah. Man. And this is the kind of stuff where it's like, it's so frustrating because you want some follow-up and they only know what they know, which is not a full story, you know?
Yeah, and that too. You know, we wish we had a super accurate reconstruction of all the events that we could just look through, but unfortunately, we have stories here, stories there. Yeah, and that's really it. And you know, we have some film because they were people on site that
look
day.
Look at how long it took to decipher Biggie and Tupac's murders.
Yeah. I don't know if you read that in the news that somebody got arrested for Tupac's murder recently.
Yeah, but I saw a more recent one on how there was like a gangbanger, and then like the initial reports were true that there were some bad cops who had sent their own literal kill squad, and it's like, man, it's like, but yeah, this was lost to time because not just the blue wall and other red tape, but also just kind of, I think like Kennedy, people loved going into Wonderland. You can
it's
talk
true.
endlessly.
You know, it's not. It's some things get lost because that red tape, the blue wall, whatever you want to call it. But also some things just get lost because they're not recorded, right? It's just something that is somebody sees, they remember it, and we don't really know the details. And so, it is what it is. Or in the case of the Babushka woman, right? We have this video, but nobody's ever found her. Nobody's ever interviewed her. So the underlying facts are.
I even wonder how they got that footage.
Yeah. Well, I think people were just filming that day because he was driving by. But yeah,
I would like to show maybe chapters of this. If someone asked me to intern at a history class, I think you could show part of RFK and open up food for thought. Because there's definitely, like you say, compared to JFK, where you're seeing some footage, but for the most part, it's just Oliver Stone on his high horse. I do feel like the RFK would just have, like, you could divide it into like a five parts. Like you could chop it up for people and say, okay, let's cover this part of the issue. Okay, what are your thoughts on this? Write an essay on this. Prompt more research, prompt more storytelling, prompt everyone to be a better researcher, even a journalist.
Yeah, and I will say with this one, like what you're saying is true. I think there's some interesting recounting of the events in here. I think that
just
that
the
works really well.
Hypnotizing, like you said, which we're like, okay, lost me there.
Hypnotizing, they lost me there for sure. But there is definitely a decent, retelling of the events here in a certain way. And I don't think that you'll necessarily come away from this one with a warped perspective on what happened. I think that they did a relatively decent job of laying out, here are some weird inconsistencies that we found, but I don't think that they're outright misleading you about the situation. Whereas I thought there were a few times
sounds cool.
Whereas I thought there were a couple of times at least with Oliver Stone where I do think that he was misleading you a little bit on the history.
Mm-hmm. He was too much in love with the sound of his own voice.
Yeah, or you know, he really wanted to have this narrative, and I think there was some selective choosing of facts. You know, we brought up the National Security Memorandum 263 or whatever, right? But we didn't clarify that actually the picture was a little more complicated, and we're not really sure what that document means given that context.
Yeah, I would have liked a little more detail on that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this RFK documentary, I didn't feel that way. I think they did a relatively good job of showing you, okay, here are some things that we view as inconsistencies without necessarily totally presenting a different picture of what actually occurred.
I couldn't say it better.
Yep. Yeah. All right.
But man, this was fun going down this rabbit hole because I can't think of any history show or podcast that's covered this. I can't think of any other show where it's like they want to talk about this. Don't get me wrong, we talk about all kinds of true crime, especially true crime and history podcasts, but I think these were an interesting thing to plan for because it was just kind of the shit wrote itself and then some. Then there was like still a bit of other stuff, and it's like, maybe it got you kind of motivated in a good way where it's like, I kind of want to do an answer to this, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt. I almost felt like it was a puzzle, you know, and I hadn't JFK and RFK like conspiracy theories. They were not really something I ever got into personally. For me, no. I was kind of like, you know, I just hadn't looked into it. And it was interesting, you know, because you get like a nugget of information and you're like, okay, that genuinely does sound weird. And then you go digging and you're like, okay, well, what is like the other side, like what is like the Warren Commission narrative on this? You know, like what is the mainstream narrative on this? And you dig a little deeper and you find, okay, well, they're saying this, and you know, then the conspiracy kind of narrative says this, and you kind of just keep digging, and you know, you can't, like you're saying, you can't put together a full picture of what's going on, but you can get a little bit of a better understanding. When, for me personally, I didn't really know why people thought this was a conspiracy. I wasn't really sure. I'd heard some weird things. I was
kind of indifferent too, where I was just like, wait, what? Okay.
Yeah.
It was kind of like some of the rock star stories in a way, where like so-and-so did that at a party one time. Oh my God, who else was there?
Yeah. And so, yeah, I agree. I thought it was kind of fun to just go down the rabbit hole a little bit on this.
Totally. Well worth it. And, you know, one's pretty accessible, and the other's somewhat obscure. So it really was a good mixture.
Yeah, I agree.
Let you go, my dude. You want to promote Almost Presidents real fast?
Yeah. So, you know, obviously we came on in the past, but if you haven't heard of us before, we are the Almost Presidents podcast. We talk about almost presidents. We talk about people who tried to campaign for the presidency and failed. We are not interested in anyone who succeeded. We throw them out.
Because you've heard all those stories. You want to hear about the underdogs.
Yeah, we're over it. Yep. We like to say that we're the only podcast that talks about history from the perspective of the losers, which is, you know, just a fun little saying for us. But other than that, you know, other than talking about that history, we also do cover kind of the ongoing presidential campaigns and races. So we've done some coverage of the Republican debates. We've done some just general coverage of the Republican campaign, as well as covering in relatively good detail, specifically the DeSantis campaign.
Yeah.
So we got some good stuff for you there. If you're interested specifically in the RFK stuff, we did a whole series about Bobby Kennedy.
Yes, you did.
And we finished that up in the summer, in I think June or July. I can't remember now off the top of my head when the last episode was. But yeah, so we finished that one up, and you can listen to the whole, you can binge it if you want. It's like 12 episodes long. And yeah, that's our show.
I love who I think it's one of your relatives who also does the intro. I love how it's like, good morning, class.
Yeah. Yeah. We got a neat little intro.
It just gets you in the mood. Intro, yeah. It's just, you're pumped up. It's like, okay, we're going to listen to some stuff that is interesting. It isn't having a substitute teacher have us go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah. So, so that's our show. We're
keep finding
little history, little politics, that type of thing. Yeah.
Keep promoting other just stories. And keep patting yourself on the back. You know, I think it is going to make a difference if more people try and do a history podcast and try. I think every little voice helps, because you look at some of the true crime podcasts, and I know there was like a true crime con, and a lot of other guys who've been in it for a while, including Nefarious Nightmare, noted how a lot of the ones that, and Nobody No Crime, I'm not sure if you heard either of those, but they both gave good tips and tricks on, much like with history, you know, reach out to people. If you want to add extra credibility to your material, don't over dramatize. You're not doing anyone, including the victims, any favors. And if there's an active case that you're covering, cease immediately. Like, just wait for the verdict so you don't unintentionally influence social media or the jury.
Yeah, that's a whole world that.
But some of them go into history as well, where they're talking about like a history of serial killings or kind of murder, political scandals. And A Few Bad Apples was another one that was very alarming. I'm like, oh my God, a crime happened here in El Paso or in Vancouver? Oh my word.
Yeah. But yeah, so if you want to check out our podcast, the Almost Presidents podcast, usually we're on Spotify. We're also generally anywhere you can get your podcasts.
In it to win it, guys.
Yep, for sure. Right now we're doing Samuel Tilden, which is the election of 1876, the one that became very disputed. It actually was very important for precedent in the 2020 election for how that was dealt with. So, you know, some interesting, relevant stuff there, I guess.
The 19th election,
Yeah. So that's our show. Definitely check us out. And yeah, thanks so much for having us on, Cam.
Anytime.
Or I guess me on, but me as a representative of the show.
What you do, I applaud what Ryan does, and I like just the back and forth. It's no bickering. It's an open panel, really.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Thanks, man.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, it's Brent Pope, the host of Breakfast with Brent Pope. You've seen me on some of your favorite TV shows saying things like, give it up, Jimmy. You got to sink this putt to win. On Breakfast with Brent Pope, I sit down with guests from the entertainment world, and we do it all over breakfast. Or should I say Brentfast? Every week on Brentfast, you get inside Hollywood info and tips, great breakfast wrecks and booty debates. Most of all, you get the most delightful 30 minutes of your week. So dig in. It's Brentfast time. Listen at Brentfast.com, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are found.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up